Hello, Haunted Family. Welcome back. Story 1. War and Remembrance. I've only had a few experiences that I would consider ghostly encounters. And this is one of them. My grandfather was a decorated soldier. He fought the Germans during World War II. He has a number of artifacts that he brought back with him from the war. One of those artifacts is an old bayonet. He told me he took it from the battlefield. I've always been a military enthusiast. I couldn't help but take a sneak peek at the bayonet when no one was looking. It was usually very off limits to us children. I took the bayonet out of its case. I noticed it had a dark stain on it. I wondered if it could be blood. Then, as I pondered this, I had a feeling. It's that feeling we all have, at least one time or another. The feeling that someone is watching you. I looked back through a window in the room and saw a figure standing outside. It was a boy, in a uniform. He had blonde hair and a blank stare. I thought a stranger was outside staring at me. I looked away for a second, and when I looked back, he was gone. I wonder if my experience had anything to do with the bayonet with the stain. I'll probably never know. I've since looked at that bayonet a dozen or more times, and I've not experienced anything like I did before. Thankfully. Story 2. Growls. My father told me this story from his past, and I found it very interesting. This happened 25 or 30 years ago. My dad was in the Air Force. Him and one of his buddies went out on a date with a couple of local girls. Dad and his friend took the girls to an old cemetery just to creep them out. The cemetery had a bunch of old graves, and some of them were kind of shallow. A few of them actually had holes opening up in them. My dad's friend reached into one of the holes in the ground and pulled out a large round object, and he shouted, "Skull!" One of the girls fainted. The skull was actually an old basketball, but the whole scene had disturbed something. My dad said this loud growling sound started. They couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere all at once. My dad and his buddy grabbed the girl who was still passed out, and they all ran out of the cemetery. As soon as they passed through the front gates of the cemetery, the growling stopped. Story 3. The Coasty Ghosty. It was springtime in the early 70s. I was a 16-year-old girl living at home with my parents. I was the youngest of 6 kids, the only one still at home. And sometimes at night, I would spend the night alone. This was not a case of negligence, but rather my parents were in their late 50s. They were supposed to be enjoying their retirement. Occasionally they'd take mini trips, overnight or weekend trips to sites of interest around the state. On this particular night, they would not be home until the very next day. I told my mom and dad that I was inviting a few of my friends over for the night, and they were okay with it. But in fact, I had secretly planned to stay home alone, as I wanted a little time away from my lively friends. After making myself a meal, and doing homework, and watching a little bit of TV, I retired for the night. It should be noted, the house we lived in had been living quarters for various commanders of the Coast Guard in previous years. The area had been a life-saving station at one time, and the lighthouse keeper's cottage was located less than 200 feet from our house. White, a historic and picturesque location. The surrounding 800 plus acres had been sold to the county and was used as seasonal campground, catering to campers and fishermen. At this time of the year, the park was closed, and our closest neighbors were about 2 miles away. At some point in the wee morning hours, I woke from a sound sleep to a state of complete immobility. My entire body felt as if tiny little pins were poking it. Hard as I tried, I was unable to move. I attempted to call out, though no one would have heard me. I could not get the sound to come out of my throat. At the foot of my bed, there stood the image of a man, with translucent milky white skin, a handlebar mustache, and very piercing eyes. His clothes were dark and very much squared away, almost like the military. I was scared out of my mind. It's a good thing my body was numb, as I might have wet myself. The thought of impending trouble kept going through my head. I distinctly heard the man's voice inside my head instructing me to go downstairs and lock the door. I could picture myself getting up and going downstairs and locking the door. It was then that the strange lock on my body was released, and the man vanished. Needless to say, I evacuated the room immediately. I headed downstairs to the back door, located in the kitchen. It was indeed unlocked, so I locked it and laid down on the couch in the living room. There was no way I was going back upstairs. A short time later, I was again awakened, this time by the sound of the back door rattling. As I jumped literally off the couch, I noticed a car parked in the driveway. I went to the kitchen, and I stared through the large window in the now locked door. Standing on the enclosed porch, just beyond the door, was the scariest looking man I've ever seen in my life. He was jiggling the doorknob, attempting to push open the solid oak and glass door with his shoulders. I shouted at him, "Get out of here!" Startled, he looked straight at me. For a few moments, we made direct eye contact. And then he turned and walked away. I never saw him or the ghost again. Years later, I was reading a book about shipwrecks and came across a story regarding Dennis Hale, the lone survivor of a shipwreck that happened not far from my lighthouse. Hale commented that an apparition had warned him not to eat the ice off his beard, that he would get pneumonia and die. The man appeared to him twice as he drifted towards the shore in a raft. Hale heeded the advice. Our two apparitions don't really look too much alike. He described his as having long hair, and mine was very clean cut and dapper. But maybe they were the same. Story 4. Grandma's Place. When I was younger, I lived with my grandma. Her house was spooky, to say the least. We would hear noises at all hours of the night. And not just the creaky kind of house noises. More like people talking in hushed voices in odd rooms of the house. We heard dogs barking in the basement. We didn't have any dogs. And we wouldn't have kept them in the basement if we did. One night I went to the bathroom rather late. The bathroom mirror faced our dining area. So walking into the bathroom, of course I looked into the mirror. And looking into it, I saw someone standing in our dining room. At the table, wearing old clothes, with long white hair. The suit he was wearing was very dressy. I turned around to look and didn't see anyone in that room. I actually ended up sleeping in the bathroom that night because I was too afraid to actually walk back out and go past the dining room. My aunt woke up one night, hearing someone calling her name. Thinking it was us, she went downstairs to our basement to take a look around and get us back to bed. She said when she got to the bottom of the stairs, she could hear giggling. She went into the furnace room and heard her name being called in our library. It was really just a spare room with tons of books. So she went in there, this time ready to ground us for being out of bed. There was no one there. She heard her name being called from a different part of the house. She ran upstairs to check on us, and we were still sleeping. It was really messed up. She really panicked that night. She could never catch up with the sound. She could never find out who or what it was coming from. There was another time, in our basement. A lot of stuff happened in our basement. We had this storage area with half doors. We would latch the top part, and the bottom half of the door had the handle. My sister and I would always play in the basement, during the day mostly. We played stupid imaginative stuff. Like, we pretended we were Buffy and Willow, and defending against monsters and things. One day we were running around the basement, playing, when we heard the top part of the door shaking. We thought our cat had somehow gotten in there, so we opened it up to let him out. There was nothing in there. We continued playing, thinking nothing of it. Strange thing happened. But then it started shaking again, more violently this time. To get out of the basement and get upstairs, you had to go directly past these doors. So of course we're just standing there, staring at the doors, watching it shake violently, with no one near it, and we already knew that there was no animal inside of it. Trying to figure out how to get out of the basement, when the door suddenly flew open. The half doors separated. We hadn't unlatched them. And it was like they exploded open. We made a move for the stairs, and the door slammed shut again, and started shaking violently again. We actually ran out of the house, and halfway down the block this time. That basement was scary. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you did, give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and drop a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Music by Carl Casey, White Bat Audio.